I found her the way you find most things the sea decides to give you. Broken, and past the hour anyone sane would still be looking. The ferry Ilan had gone down 4 nights before, somewhere out past the Needle Rocks, and the wardens who came through Sallow Reach afterward told us there had been no survivors, that the ship carried nothing but cargo and a crew who'd known the risk. I had no reason to doubt them. I had every reason to doubt them. I had spent 11 years in the Compact's coastal levee before I came home to keep this light, and I knew exactly how a clean report gets written when the truth is inconvenient to somebody with rank. She was lying in the tide pool below the lighthouse stair, tangled in a torn length of sailcloth, silver-veined and small, with gill slits along her throat opening and closing like a fish left too long on the deck. I carried her up the stair myself. I did not think about it as a decision. My arms simply did it, the way arms do when there is a child in them, and the tide is coming back in. I called her Wren, because the first sound she made, once the color came back into her, was a thin, churring note that put me in mind of a bird singing before it had quite decided the day was safe. Her own name, when she was old enough to trust me with it, was Sayeli. I kept using Wren anyway, in front of anyone who might ask, because a fisherman's granddaughter with an ordinary name draws no questions, and a Corvinai orphan with a treaty ship cipher running in her blood draws every question there is. I did not know, that first night, what she carried in her. I only knew what I'd have wanted done, if it had been my own girl the sea washed up broken somewhere far from home. It was a long time before I understood the rest of it, that the Ilan had not simply gone down, that its cargo had been the living seal of a peace neither side wanted kept, and that the Empire's clean report of no survivors was the whole point. A dead ship tells no one anything. A living child tells everyone that somebody lied. I did not tell her any of that until she was old enough to carry it without it breaking her, which took longer than I would have liked, and less time than I'd hoped. 22 years is not so long, looking back on it now, but lived forward, day by day, it was the better part of a life. I taught her to mend nets and read tide charts and keep the lamp burning through weather that would put out lesser lights. She taught me, without meaning to, that a man can go on caring about something long after he has stopped believing the world will let him keep it. She grew up sharp-eyed and steady-handed, with a laugh she'd learned from the fishwives and a stillness that was entirely her own, the kind of quiet that comes from a body built to survive under water and pressure I will never understand. She asked, sometimes, why her throat did what it did, why her blood ran warmer than anyone else's in the village. I told her what I could and no more, because some doors, once you open them for a child, cannot be closed again, and I was not going to hand her a fear before she needed one. There is a night I still turn over more than the others. She was perhaps 9, small enough that the gill slits along her throat still frightened her when they opened on their own in deep water, and a fever had come on her hard after a long swim in a cold current she should have had the sense to avoid. I sat up with her 3 nights running, sponging her down with water from the cistern, listening to her breath rattle in a way no village doctor could have explained without asking questions I could not afford to have asked. On the 4th morning her fever broke and she looked up at me and asked, in the plain, unguarded voice children use before they learn to soften a hard question, whether I would have kept her if she had died instead of gotten better. I told her the truth, that I would have buried her myself, on the headland, facing the water she came out of, and that I would have kept the light burning every night after regardless. She did not ask again. The danger never announced itself all at once. It came the way weather comes to a coast, a warden's boat lingering a season too long near the Needle Rocks, a stranger in the tavern asking after old Rex with too much interest in his eyes, a letter from an old levee contact warning me that someone in the capital had started asking why the Ilan's manifest didn't match its wreckage count. Each time I told myself we had another year. Each time I was mostly right, until the year I wasn't. They came at low tide, on a gray morning with the wind backing hard out of the north, 4 of them in a cutter flying no colors, which told me everything about who had sent them, and how little they meant to answer for it afterward. I had known this morning was coming for the better part of a year, in the way a man knows a storm is coming from the color the light goes over the water long before the first drop falls. I had made what preparations an old man alone on a cliff can make, which is to say not many, and had spent most of that year quietly teaching Wren the reef channel by feel, in the dark, until she could run it with her eyes shut and her breath steady, though I never told her why I was so insistent she learn it. I watched the cutter from the gallery of the light, and I knew, the way you know a wave has already committed itself before it breaks, that this was the morning the bill came due. I sent Wren down the cliff path to the cove where I kept the small boat, the one only the 2 of us knew threaded a channel through the reef that no chart admitted existed. I told her to take it out past the Needle Rocks at slack water and wait for the running lights of a fishing boat called the Constant Hour, whose captain owed me a debt older than she was and had promised, years back, to honor it the day I finally called it in. She did not want to go. She stood on the stair with her jaw set the way I'd taught her not to set it in front of strangers, and she asked me to come with her, and I told her the light needed tending, and that was true enough, as far as it went. What I did not tell her was that 4 wardens climbing a narrow stair go single file, and a man who has held that stair against worse odds in a worse war can make single file cost more than they've budgeted for, and that every minute it cost them was a minute of tide going out from under the reef, opening her channel wider. I will not dwell on what happened on those stairs. It was not a long fight, and it was not the kind men write songs about. It was an old man's hands doing one last useful thing, and a door that did not open, and a light that kept burning the whole time because I had trimmed the wick that morning out of habit, the same as any other morning of the 22 years before it. She told me later, because she came back, years after, when it was safe enough to come back, and stood a long while at the foot of a lighthouse relit by other hands, that she had seen the beam still turning from out past the needle rocks, and had known by that alone that I had held the stair as long as it needed holding. She said she had wanted to turn the boat around. She said the tide had made the decision for her, the way tides do, and that some part of her had hated the tide for it ever since, and some part of her had been grateful, and that both parts were still true. I am telling this the way I told it to her, once, the year she was finally old enough to hear the whole shape of it. I did not save her because I owed the Empire an answer, or because I was owed anything by the sea for what it took from me 11 years before her. I did it because a child was drowning at the bottom of my stair, and I had 2 arms, and there was never, in 22 years, a single morning where that stopped being reason enough. The light still turns. Someone else trims the wick now. But I am told that on the anniversary, a fishing boat called the Constant Hour still cuts its engine off the needle rocks a while before dawn, and a woman with silver in her veins and a bird's name given to her by an old man stands at the rail, watching the beam come around, the way you watch a promise that outlived the man who made it.